Wir gehen in die dritte Runde. Ich darf euch die dritte Referentin vorstellen, die Marijke Colle aus Belgien. Sie ist Biologin, wie ihr dem Prospekt entnehmen könnt. Biologie-Lehrerin. Es war sehr wichtig zu sagen, dass sie auch Lehrerin ist oder war mit Jugendlichen und Erwachsenen. Sie ist auch Mitglied der Ökologiekommission der 4. Internationale, also unserer internationalen Bewegung, und der Ökologiekommission in Belgien. Und sie ist, das ist heute Abend ja auch Thema, eine Feministin der ersten Stunde aus den 70er Jahren, also die zweite feministische Welle, war sehr aktiv auch bei der Durchsetzung der Legalisierung der Abtreibung in Belgien, die erst 1992 im Übrigen legalisiert wurde. Österreich war meines Wissens 1975, auch ziemlich spät, aber okay. Die Marijke wird ihr Referat auf Englisch halten. Ich kann alle beruhigen. Ich habe sie schon auf Englisch gehört. Sie spricht langsam, deutlich, gut verständlich. Die Anfragen und die Diskussionsbeiträge könnt ihr selbstverständlich auf Deutsch abgeben. Und sie wird auch auf Deutsch antworten. Ihr habt sie bei der letzten Diskussion schon aus dem Publikum gehört. Sie kann ausgezeichnet Deutsch, ja, aber das Referat, die Fachsprache ist ja, glaube ich, lieber auf Englisch, beziehungsweise hat sie auf Englisch ihre Referate fertig und auf Deutsch müsste sie neu schreiben, oder? Ja, wir haben wieder eine Stunde Zeit. Auf meiner Uhr ist es 20 vor 5. Das heißt bis 20 vor 6. Und wir machen wieder in etwa 40 Minuten Referat und 20 Minuten, ja, dass die anderen auch mitreden. Okay.
Also, good afternoon, everyone. I'm excuse myself that I'm not speaking in German. It's because I'm not sure about myself in German. So my active knowledge of German is not big enough. My passive knowledge is rather good. So I understand what you all say, but to make an explanation, a scientific or political explanation in German is still a bit difficult. So I feel more comfortable doing it in English. Is that okay until now for everyone? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to talk on a less theoretical topic, and the topic is a question. The question is there a link between feminism and ecology? Oh, many people are not aware of that. What is the link between feminists and ecology? Huh? Well, I have been writing about that and reading about that since the 1970s. And the origin of my questioning was the writings of Vandana Shiva and Maria Mies, two feminist women who were preoccupied by the ecological degradation in the Third World. So feminism, ecofeminism, sees a parallel between, on the one hand, the exploitation and destruction of nature worldwide, and the exploitation of women in their life, in the whole life cycle of women. Mm-hmm. They see in ecofeminism it's quite difficult to define because it contains a whole range of currents and opinions and different political subjects and different political projects. For instance, many ecofeminists are ecologists, so concerned about ecological destruction and degradation, about the maintenance of biodiversity and so on. And for instance, Vandana Shiva, who was in the origin a physicist, an atomic physicist, became aware of the destruction caused by mega dams and big projects in India. Mega dams who destroyed the ancient water currents and canals, who destroyed the small-scale agricultural practices in favor of big agribusiness projects and big projects with mega dams for the better the better profit of big companies. So they made a link between this kind of destruction and they made the link with a criticism of so-called real science, hard science. So they criticized, for instance, very strongly and correctly, the fact that the population, the overpopulation in India could be solved when the women had less children. And to tell you a story, Vandana Shiva tells a story. She said the army got a kind of containers in which you had scanners to determine the sex of an unborn baby. And so the official, the soldiers got a premium when they could persuade a woman to have an abortion if the child was a girl. So you had the science of scanning, the ideology that overpopulation is the cause of all evil, and that the state can intervene in the life and the rights of women to choose to have children or not. And those campaigns are for Vandana Shiva the paradigm of the way Western capitalist science determines the priorities, the methods, and the studies of what is necessary to keep people in good health. So this selective abortion has had as a result that all ancient prejudices against girls and women have been strengthened, and that the imbalance in India between girls and boys has become extremely high. You have more than 120 boys for 100 girls at the moment. So that gives you also big social problems. They also criticized the so-called development studies. The development studies are a reformulation of the ancient colonial project. We call it neo-colonialism. It is neo-colonialism, but it's also a colonialism that is emphasizing extractivism, mining, robbing the people of their own resources, and making the people in the ancient colonies feeling inferior to the superior male-dominated Western science. And that's an important aspect of ecofeminism. At the same time, is ecofeminism a broad range of currents who are also part of the broader feminist movement worldwide. And ecofeminism evolved in a different way in the global third world, the South, the global South, in comparison with the North or the Western countries. For instance, in Europe and in the United States, ecofeminism becomes an important force in the anti-nuclear movement. You had women against atomic weapons. The women in Greenham Common, the big military bases in the United Kingdom, who surrounded a big military base, an air base, to send atomic missiles to Europe. And they surrounded it, and they made women camps, who were very funny. People were knitting and doing strange things, to which the soldiers and the police could not react. So it's an alternative way invented by women at that moment to contest the superiority of the military, to contest the logic of atomic war, and to be in favor of peace, but not abstract peace, but peace without atomic weapons. So that's an important element in the development of ecofeminist thinking. On the other hand, in the global South, there has been the development of a new agricultural international, which is called Via Campesina. And in Via Campesina, it's the small farmers and the local production which is at the center, and the fight against agribusiness. Agribusiness who builds plantations with loss of biodiversity, plantations with machines managed by the man, and the women have no role in agriculture anymore. And in the global South, you also have still indigenous people who are at the moment in a fight for survival against agribusiness. When the forests and the natural ecosystems are destroyed, people have no more way to live there. So it's like the enclosure of the commons in England and the creation of a proletariat in the industrialization of Europe. You have the same at the moment with the mega slums in all major third world cities. People who have been obliged to leave, they cannot live anymore in the countryside the way they used to do it, and they cannot build an alternative locally because they are expropriated, they are chased. So ecofeminism takes all these things into account, and it represents also a new way of dialogue on equal footing between women in the so-called third world or the global south and women from the global north. We had dialogues around medical practices, dialogues around agriculture, and dialogues where you find out that women are confronted with similar mechanisms of oppression as women. Women are not equal to man, that's very clear, in the third world and in our world, and women find methods to fight that and to strengthen their own movement in different ways, but in finding answers to very similar problems. In that sense, it was a confrontation, but it's also an enrichment of both the women's movement in the third world and in the north. And I think ecofeminism has been part of that. Ecofeminism also makes the link between the violence and the patriarchal character of Western so-called scientific paradigms in medicine, in development of drugs, in vision on what consists, what is global health and what is a healthy way of living and so on. And the Western paradigms have been fought against because they are so racist and so colonialist that it was evident for ecofeminists in the third world that this kind of official science, or let's say profit-oriented science, this type of science is not serving the well-being of the people or the well-being of women. And the destructiveness of these capitalist developments in the third world are also now more and more visible in our world with the European agricultural policies, with the pesticides, the genetically modified organisms, with the global commerce of agricultural products. The north of Africa next month will be trying to import grain from the Ukraine. So they are dependent on that. So if the Ukraine continues to go through this terrible war, there will be no grain for the north of Africa. So the links between the global regions of the world are now so strong that events in Ukraine can have a consequence for social disturbances in Algeria, for instance. Good. So this all has to do with a way of seeing production, distribution of production and consumption as part of one machine. And that machine is not a general economic well-being. That machine is the capitalist profit machine. You want to make a profit, otherwise you don't do it. And if you have a profit, it serves to make your capital bigger, the amount of money you can use bigger, to invest there where you have the certainty that even more profit will come from. This has nothing to do with the normal, let's say, anthropological reason why you should make an effort to do something. Why should I work hard just that some guy in the United States or in a European bank can write more figures in his bank accounts? And with what? With useless things or producing dangerous things? The whole business of the arms business at the moment is the most polluting economic activity in the world. The United States Army emissions of carbon dioxide are horrendous. So the army as such is completely useless. You cannot eat cannons. You cannot eat bullets. You cannot use a tank. this is all useless. This is waste. This is energy waste, labor waste, and so on. So in the ecofeminist currents, let's say, ecofeminist circles, militarism is really at the center of criticism. But there's an aspect of ecofeminism with which I do not agree completely. That is the aspect that this militarism and this kind of profit-oriented logic is typical for the male. And that women, because they are women, they give birth to children, are biologically different and nearer to nature. I don't think that's true. I don't think there is an innate biological difference between man and women. So I would not agree with some ecofeminists who say that the world would be better off without man, which is an absurdity, of course. We should not procreate. But I think that the values which are emerging out of this ecofeminist movement can be central in a new alternative for the current ecological, economical, military crisis. Because in our current society, and the current society I would not describe it as a patriarchy, because patriarchy is much too general as a term. I describe our society as a capitalist society. And even in the smallest villages in the world, capitalism has its influence, has its consequences. So capitalism has covered the whole planet with its own logic. And in that system, people still live in families, and in families, women have a specific role. We see, and that's also one of the points which I learned from ecofeminism, the analysis of the links between public life and private life, the dichotomy between man and women, what is typical male, what is typical female, the dichotomy between paid work and unpaid invisible work, between art and science, the dichotomy between body and brain is a dichotomy which is false. Both are linked. So when you believe in that dichotomy, you will say, this is typical man, and that's typical woman. And we don't agree with that. We think that in our society, this dichotomy leads us to an overestimation of the importance of the male norms and an underestimation of the importance of the so-called female norms. So we should get rid of that and try to find another way to fund the values we have in our society. And what we see is that those differences which are ingrained in our tradition between what is male and female, those differences have to be overcome. But in our society, in our economy, they are very useful for the system. So, and the corona crisis learns a lot about that too. Women are lesser paid, not because they are women, but because their jobs are lesser valued. So cleaning or caring for the elderly or healthcare or even education at the moment are more and more devalued because and taken on by women. Both are going together. In medicine, it's the nurse is the woman, and the surgeon is a male. He has the knife. You have a number of activities in our society which are really invisible, but absolutely necessary in order to continue to create and to continue life as such. And the corona crisis has shown us that very clearly. Without the care given by a majority of women in the whole of the health sector, the corona crisis could never be solved. So this kind of economy, this view on the economy developed by the ecofeminists was the economy is like a big mountain, and the top of the mountain is above water, it's visible, that's the formal economy. But what's underneath, which is the foundation of all, is invisible work. And that work has now become a central focus in a lot of the feminist organizations and movements. It's the care work, the so-called care work. So caring has been a feminine or a woman's activity in whole history, let's say. But at the moment we see how essential it is and how humanizing it is. People who are in caring professions or activities, people can be men or women, they have another way of looking at life than the production manager and the efficiency managers and so on. But what we see is that in the development of capitalism, the oppression of women has continued. It has not stopped, which we could have thought that when women had the right to work, the right to vote, and some other rights, that women would have become equal to men. But that's not the case. It's the private sphere, the private lives of people are still showing this inequality between males and females, between men and women, with different appreciations and different descriptions. And also, the autonomy of women, the way they can or cannot decide about their own lives, continues to be a terrain of big, big struggles. The whole struggle against abortion rights everywhere in the world, the whole struggles by the extreme fundamentalistic right-wing religions is against women and the decision-making by women on their own life. And also the choices, the right to make choices for women are still very limited. And the autonomy of women. So the idea that I am a person, and an autonomous person, I can decide what I like and what I don't like, or how I live with other people or don't. And for instance, the attacks against sexual minorities, LGBTQ people, the attacks against trans persons are part of this fight of the system against the autonomy of individuals, especially women. In the United States, you have a group or groups which call themselves TERS, Trans Excluding Radical Feminists, who say that a trans person who has been assigned a male gender by birth and who wants to change that, for these radical right-wing feminists, these are spies, male spies, introducing themselves in the women's movement. So they deny, again, the autonomy and the independence of the choices people made as such. So you have all kinds of debates, and the debate on violence, on harassment, and so on. And the Me Too campaigns show that equality, equal rights do not guarantee equality, real equality. And these debates have had an influence in some ecofeminist circles, who in the beginning were the soft persons, the women and nature, that's all very nice, and the males are aggressive. So simple, it's not that simple. Right? And inside the feminist movement, you have long discussions, and we had those discussions since the beginning of the second feminist wave in the 1960s, 70s. For instance, the debates on the fact that women do non-paid household work has led to two currents in feminism. The current who said household work should not be the task of only the women. So women and males should share household tasks and arrive at equality, because both should work inside the family and outside in society. That's an equality logic. The other logic was differentialist. Women do the care in the home and the males are outside. So you have these debates since the 1970s already, but the consequences of these debates, the consequences of the situation are that wages of women are considered normally being lower than of men. And when professions become feminized, like medical doctors at the moment, the wages go down. In Soviet Union, some people found that fantastic, women did jobs on an equal footing with men in building, for instance. And they earned more than a doctor, because a hand worker was a hero of socialism, and a doctor was just a doctor. So the doctors were lesser paid than the building worker. Right? But at the moment, what we see in our society and globally is that the jobs which are taken over by women are devalued. The teaching professions, the whole care and health service. Now, in order to criticize and to change these things in reality, ecofeminists as well as the traditional leftist feminists agree together very strongly that we have a permanent need of an autonomous women's movement. An autonomous movement means it's not the socialist women and the communist women and the Christian democratic women who have to work together. It's the women's movement who has to develop and practice a consciousness surrounding their unhappiness and the demands they can formulate. For instance, in my country, in Belgium, the Christian trade union women in the 1970s and beginning of the 1980s were still, for religious reasons, opposed to abortion. You don't kill a soul created by God, something like that. At the same time, they were, like other women, confronted with the necessity of having a safe abortion practice. So they agreed, after long discussions we, the left feminists, had with them, agreed on the necessity to have the right for abortions and to create a legitimate abortion clinics and practice, so to abolish the terrible law. We had to fight until 1992 because we had a Catholic fundamentalist king who refused to sign the law, and government decided he was for 24 hours insane, so that the prime minister could sign the law changing the abortion situation in Belgium. So, but we have learned, all the women I know from my generation who were active from the 70s on, we learned more from formulating demands, analyzing why we made a demand, and formulating also tactics to build broad coalitions. Build broad coalitions made us speakers on public places, made us leaders. The word is not very popular amongst women, our kind of women. Leaders in a movement, so spokespersons in a movement, and also we learned to read and to analyze and to become aware of different situations in the situation of women. And the same happened with the nuclear question. The big anti-missile demonstrations in Europe against the bringing in of American SS-20 missiles against Russia in the 1970s and 80s gave us an impetus to have a big anti-nuclear energy movement. And after the terrible accident in Chernobyl in 1986, and even later in 2011, the catastrophe in Fukushima, the anti-nuclear movement has won. And important there is that Merkel had the courage to say, no, we stop nuclear energy. It's not always simple to explain why politicians change their minds, but those two catastrophes had enormous social consequences. I think Chernobyl was the beginning of the questioning by Gorbachev of the whole rotten bureaucratic dictatorship in Russia. And in Fukushima, we had the consequences in a country like Germany and Japan. But there we see again how militarism and nationalism are reactionary and dangerous forces, militarism and nationalism today, with this war by Putin, has as a consequence that there's a new thinking about nuclear energy, because it's not, it's climate friendly, they say. It doesn't emit carbon dioxide, which is absurd because it does emit it in all the other parts of the chain of the production of nuclear energy. And so, for instance, to refer again to my country, in Belgium, there were still 2 nuclear plants active in Belgium, near Antwerp, a very big port in Europe, and near Liège, a very big city in Wallonia. Those 2 nuclear plants were going to be closed in 2025. Now they are waiting, because we need it perhaps. And why is that? Because there is no political will to change the production and to diminish the emission of carbon dioxide, to diminish the demand of energy. So we need it, we need it, we need it, they say. But who needs it? It's those who make profit out of it. And so we will be confronted in Belgium with the continued existence of those 2 nuclear plants and the creation of 2 new gas plants to protect us for electricity falling out. But the question of protecting Belgium or protecting our country's economy through lowering emissions never comes into question. Lower emissions, no, no, no. No priority plans for better housing, for insulating houses. No plans for working on a real public transport system that's free for all. Those things are secondary towards the motive of more car producing and more SUV producing. So profits for the car industry are more important than energy problems or than the well-being of the planet. And it is that logic that is contested by the whole of the climate movement and the let's say, the honest and still radical ecological movement. Because the green parties are neoliberals. They are sacrificing everything for the profit motive for the big companies. So as an ecofeminist, I would say we have to care for the people. Do we care for the people by putting them every day 200 kilometers in a queuing on the motorways? Do we care for the well-being of people by making energy so expensive or by having bad social housing? No. So the priorities in our society today are wrong. The priority is the profit motive all the time. Those priorities should be reversed. And from a feminist point of view, that's for sure, priorities should be the well-being of the private lives of everyone, with services, with public services, at the service of everyone. For instance, good transport, good teaching, good health services at all levels. That would take away the burden on women for their personal responsibility all the time, 24 hours a day, for the well-being of the members of their family. This should be much more collective and much more easy to do in a public service system. So at the moment we see the reverse. We see in the corona crisis many old people dying because the homes for the elderly are badly managed and have, let's say, not enough personnel, and personnel who are badly paid and overworked. So this was not a priority for society. You put the older people away in a home, and they will die anyway, statistically in 5 years, most of them. And so this is not humane. This is only linked to profit. And we have seen in Belgium a lot of old people's homes who were privatized instead of remaining as a public service. Privatized means they were more costly, and many people could not afford it, and the service was very bad. So this is a scandal, a real scandal revealed in the corona crisis, and it shows that the priorities in our society are wrong. And that's fundamentally what ecofeminism says. the priorities are wrong. We don't need lithium to have even more mobile phones, even more electric cars. We need a nice landscape, a good landscape where people can live of the activity which is suited there. And so it is not enough to restore natural reserves. We have to rethink the whole of agriculture, and I think that the discussion, the previous discussion showed that also. We need to rethink agriculture at several levels in the agricultural regions, but also in cities, and also in abolishing abolishing the agrochemical system. For instance, in Belgium, again, I like to give those examples. There's a little town in the south of Belgium, Mons, and nearby there is a factory which works on potatoes, and they make deep-fried French fries. They frites. And now they want to expand it. The local people started to protest because it smells, the frying oil. Now, this local activity, small, became bigger and bigger because the people were thinking, why do they do that? Why do we have so many potatoes in Belgium? There's a lot potato fields, and potatoes are exhausting the soil. So you need more fertilizers again. So the potato industry has reshaped healthy agriculture and healthy potatoes into big machines for making French fries for McDonald's in Japan. It is in Japan. They go until Japan. It's completely crazy. So the people from that action group started to think about what do we produce, what is produced in Belgium, and where does it go to? So, and why do they want these priorities changed? Because they have understood that they only make that factory with French fries bigger for profit, not for the well-being of people in Japan. I mean, they have good rice. So, an ecofeminist approach would say it is not the profit motive that counts, but is the well-being of the people. And so that's also what we as eco-socialists used to say the last years. But from a feminist point of view, it is even more direct. And you have a mobilizing force inside the feminist movement, which is more, let's say, more global and less Eurocentric, ecofeminism. And that's for me also quite an important aspect. So when I had discussions in the Philippines with indigenous peoples, community, very interesting. They have to fight against the state, the paramilitary, the agribusiness who want their forests, and so on. And those people said, yes, we have won a big victory because we have elaborated a constitution for our communities. And I said, yes, and what about polygamy in your constitution? Because it was recognized in that constitution. Now, polygamy is quite anti-woman, because it's the males who pick the women, it's not on both sides. So the male said, yes, that's our tradition. Okay, I said, okay, if you think so, it's so. And then we had a meeting with the women alone. And the elderly women said, yeah, polygamy, in fact, we don't like it, but we have to live with it. And the younger women said, over my dead body, never. So because the elderly women said, what can we do against the fact that in our world today, when an elderly man wants to have sex with an attractive young woman, this is stimulated by society in films and so on. So he is tempted, when he has money, to buy a new young wife. And the elderly women said, yeah, I can't compete with that young woman. I lose anyway. So that was the voice of the elderly women who were quiet. But the young women said, no. I'm an individual, I will make a choice of partner, and so on and so forth. So you have those changes also in the discussion, because I was a white European Western feminist. But when listening and when eyes and body language and so on, we understood each other. The women understood each other. But with the males it was more difficult. But when all women in a community show resistance or passive resistance or active, then it changes society. So I would say ecofeminism, with all its different currents, you have the Mother Earth ideology, but you also had North American theologians, ecofeminist theologians. They see something in the Bible, I don't see it, but good. And the idea that women as such, by their nature, are more linked to nature. I think it's wrong, but the methodology, the approach, has now become central in many discussions in feminism in general. The discussion centrally is, if we don't take care at the center of our concerns, the world will be destroyed. And care means, in the ecological crisis and the corona crisis, taking care of nature, because the origin of that crisis is a virus probably coming out of destruction of ecosystems. So the care of the people should be also an attitude of care for nature, and the care for people should also be taken on board by trade unionists in the fight against horrible working circumstances. Care should be at the center of how we teach young children. We don't discipline them, we care for them. We help them to develop. And care for nature, that's clear in ecofeminism, that we can learn nothing from capitalist science. We must learn from the farmers themselves, from the history of practices, and from the knowledge which was denied by official science, knowledge from the Middle Ages on fertilizing plants and so on. So there is a wealth of knowledge and potential if people listen to the wisdom of farmers, small farmers, of the wisdom of women who knew that when you cut the trees in the Himalayas, you have avalanches and flooding. All those things exist, and that should become a more, let's say, organized or a more structured current inside feminism, because feminism as such concerns half the human species. It's half of the humans who are female. And they all have brains. And so many men implicitly still say that or think that woman, that's for other purposes. It's not for thinking. It's for cooking, it's for sex, it's for beauty, but not for brains and politics. So the paradigm of care should become a central paradigm. Paradigm means that's the way you start thinking about it. Care, what do we mean? Care for the city, care for your street, care for your house, care for your family members, care for the way we behave towards other people, which means that we listen. We listen. So the worst which happens sometimes is that mostly males are explaining to me what I have to think. Mansplaining, it's called in English. Mansplaining. And that's the reverse of what an ecofeminist attitude tries to be in the society, but also the structures. So to come back to Via Campesina, which is the Farmers International of mainly small farmers, at a certain moment they started to coordinate at an international level. So we had international meetings. So farmers from local Via Campesina groups went to other countries, travel. In the beginning, there were no women in the international meetings, because who is going to care for? All kinds of things. The farm, the children, everything. So women did not go. At a certain moment, the women said, we should take part of those conferences too. Okay. And then women had a pre-conference before the real conference. That was the first step. But after that, women said, but we want to be part of the real conferences. Okay. And then the women said, we have some problems we want to discuss in the organization as such. And the first problem the women brought forward to discuss inside Via Campesina on an international conference was the violence against the women. It was not farming, it was not food, it was the violence against women. And that shows again that as an ecofeminist, you should be very strong in demanding the their own structures, their own ways to organize for women so that they can express and formulate their needs and what they want in an organization, their demands. And that strengthens the women's movement and strengthens the movement as a whole. Now that's a very old lesson from the feminist movement, that feminists do not divide but strengthen the movement. And I think that ecofeminists also are not dividing but are strengthening the movement for the preservation of the planet and the climate and for the preservation of the link between human society and nature, which has been so very often destroyed and completely destroyed. Okay, that's it.
Danke, Marijke, für das spannende Referat, auch für die Beispiele, die deine Argumente sehr gut unterstrichen haben, auch für Good Practice, sagt man ja auch auf Deutsch mittlerweile, ja, die guten Beispiele aus verschiedensten Weltgegenden. So, wir haben jetzt noch bis 5:20 Zeit für Wortmeldungen aus dem Publikum. Ja, das gibt's doch nicht.
You told there are a lot of different feminist...
Du kannst ruhig Deutsch reden. Wir haben gesagt, man kann ruhig... Du darfst auch Englisch reden, entschuldige. Ja.
Deutsch. Das ist besser.
Ja. Du hast gesagt, es gibt halt verschiedene feministische Bewegungen weltweit und jede Bewegung hat ihren eigenen ideologischen Hintergrund. Jetzt zu den Ökofeministinnen, da hast du auch gesagt, es gibt da Differenzierungen darunter. Das heißt, es sind nicht notwendigerweise natürliche Verbündete der ökosozialistischen Bewegung, sondern du sagst, kannst du diese Differenzierung doch ein bisschen genauer machen? Also sind sie jetzt natürliche Verbündete, sind sie integraler Bestandteil unserer zukünftigen zu entwickelnden internationalen ökosozialistischen Bewegung oder sind sie eine eigene Strömung, die ihre Autonomie dauerhaft bewahren sollte, was du ja auch gesagt hast, sie bestehen auf Autonomie. Also kannst du dieses Verhältnis zwischen Ökofeministin, ökosozialistischer Bewegung uns noch mal ein bisschen genauer erklären? Danke.
Ja, okay.
So, I think that, ich glaube, dass Ökofeminismus ist ein Teil der Suche nach einer realen Alternative, eine ökosoziale Alternative, ist ein Teil davon. So, es gibt keinen Antagonismus zwischen Ökofeministen und Ökosozialisten. Es ist die Dimension der Frauen und die Unterdrückung der Frau, die notwendigerweise präsent sein muss, wenn wir eine Analyse machen der Slum Cities in der dritten Welt oder eine Analyse der kleinen Bauern. Und das ist so wichtig. Zum Beispiel, ich hatte die Erfahrung mit Genossinnen aus Argentinien in einer Schule in Amsterdam, wo die Frauen aus Argentinien sagten, wir machen Essen für die Armen in unserer Gegend, in die Stadt. Und wir sehen das als ein feministischer Einsatz. Also die traditionelle enge Vision der westlichen Feministen war, das ist wiederum die Frauen, die kochen. Das ist nicht Befreiung. Und wir sagen, nein, das ist Befreiung, weil das die Armen die Gelegenheit gibt, sich zu organisieren, zusammenzukommen und in Bewegung zu kommen. So, das sind verschiedene Lebenserfahrungen mit dasselbe Ziel, die Frauen mündiger zu machen und stärker zu machen und die ganze Bevölkerung und die Leute, die ökonomisch arm sind. So, in diesem Sinne denke ich, dass Ökofeminismus, der Ökosozialismus vollständiger macht. Die feministische Dimension ist notwendig in Ökosozialismus. Also Bewegungen, das ist noch etwas anderes. Wenn du eine Frauengruppe hast in deiner Stadt und die machen eine Aktion, es ist eine Bewegung. Wenn wir haben eine Klimabewegung, ist eine Bewegung. Und in dieser Bewegung haben wir verschiedene Leute mit verschiedenen Gedenken. Okay, aber sie sind zusammen für das Ziel der Bewegung. Und das ist, was wir machen müssen.
Ja, danke für diesen Vortrag. Ich habe es sehr genossen, sozusagen das auch bin selber sozusagen Feministin und beschäftige mich auch sozusagen schon sehr lang mit Ökologie. Insofern hat mich auch sehr früh sozusagen Vandana Shiva und Maria Mies interessiert und
ein bisschen lauter bitte, ohne
ja,
Maske.
Mache ich sie runter.
Ja,
ja.
Und deutlich bitte. Ja.
Was mich ein bisschen irritiert hat, war sozusagen die Aussage, dass sozusagen der Begriff des Patriarchats zu weit gefasst ist, ja, als dass er relevant wäre, und den Kapitalismus zu kritisieren ist konkreter. Ja. Für mich ist der Kapitalismus sozusagen das Wirtschaftssystem, ja, das natürlich auch sehr stark sowas wie Gesellschaft prägt. Ja. Aber Patriarchat ist eine Gesellschaftsform. Also das ist sozusagen mein Blick drauf. Ja. Okay. Und da geht es dann auch nicht um biologistische Zugänge, sondern da geht es um strukturelle Zugänge. Und die ja historisch auch gewachsen sind. Ja. Also, und du hast ja auch Beispiele gebracht, wie das Recht auf die Selbstbestimmung, Selbstbestimmung über meinen Körper, auch in Bezug auf Abtreibung zum Beispiel, ja, immer noch in Frage gestellt wird. Ja. Es gibt Länder, da wird es wieder zurückgenommen, komplett verboten. Ja. Frauen, auch in Österreich ist das immer noch im Strafrecht, ja, verankert. Ja. Und das ist für mich sozusagen einfach eine strukturelle Ebene, wo klar ist, dass unsere Gesellschaft nach wie vor patriarchal strukturiert ist, ja, und wir Frauen sehr darauf aufpassen müssen, dass erkämpfte Rechte nicht, und mittlerweile ja nicht mehr über die Hintertüren, sondern wieder durch die Vordertüren, ja, genommen werden. Und das würde ich gern sozusagen nochmal auf. Danke.
Ja, wenn ich das Wort Patriarchat nehme, dann ist das für mich ein Konzept, das historisch für alles gilt. Es gibt immer Patriarchat. Vielleicht nicht in ganz Beginn der Menschheit, vor die verschiedenen Klassen oder soziale Lagen entstanden sind. Also sicher, since das Beginn der Landwirtschaft gibt es Patriarchat. So, das bin ich sicher. Also das heißt... Nein. 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 Also patriarchale Gesellschaften heißen, dass die Normen und dass die Motor der gesellschaftlichen Struktur ändert sich im Laufe der Zeit. Die ersten Strukturen waren sicher verbunden mit Familienstrukturen. Und diese Familienstrukturen waren eigentlich Produktionsverhältnisse. Wie man beschlossen hat, das Land für das anzuwenden und das für das, das war die Gruppe, die das determinierte. Aber patriarchale Strukturen als Motor der gesellschaftlichen Entwicklung, nein, ich sehe verschiedene andere Sachen. Aber patriarchale Attitude, natürlich. Es gibt eine Ideologie, die zusammengeht mit dieser Macht der Männer im Anfang, und die ändert sich in verschiedenen in verschiedenen Phasen der Entwicklung der Gesellschaften. Also wir haben Patriarchat im Mittelalter, sicher, aber die mittelalterliche Gesellschaft ist ganz verschieden von der heutigen. Und hier haben wir noch immer Patriarchat. Also das ist eine Art, um Frauen ideologisch und praktisch zu fangen. So, es gibt Rollen und die ganze Diskussion über Gender, das geht über patriarchale Unterdrückungen, diese bestehen, aber es ist keine gesellschaftliche Struktur als solche. Die Ökonomie ist etwas anderes. Aber es ist natürlich alles... Okay.
Ich glaube, was politisch für uns spannend ist, wie sich diese patriarchalen mit den kapitalistischen Strukturen überlagern, teilweise einander verstärkend und teilweise auch widersprüchlich. Und das sehen wir, glaube ich, recht gut. Also einerseits ist es für den Kapitalismus in manchen Phasen durchaus günstig, wenn zum Beispiel Frauen auf den Arbeitsmarkt kommen, also nämlich wenn es zu wenig Arbeitskräfte gibt. Ne? Und dann ist es wieder ganz günstig, wenn man sie rausdrängen kann, und das sehen wir auch immer, die fallen dann auch bald aus der Arbeitslosenstatistik raus, weil sie sind dann Hausfrauen. Ne? Und was jedenfalls günstig ist für den Kapitalismus, ist, dass es die unbezahlte Arbeit gibt, die halt wesentlich von Frauen geleistet wird. Ne? Und ich denke, in dieser Verknüpfung, also jetzt unabhängig davon, wie sich das historisch entwickelt hat, also, aber ich glaube, da ist die politische Einflugschneise für uns als Sozialistinnen, damit umzugehen.
Ja. Richtig.
Ja, da kann ich ganz kurz dran anknüpfen. Ich denke, dass, was es so schlecht macht, dass im Kapitalismus nach wie vor Patriarchat herrscht, ist, dass die zwei Hauptkriterien, nämlich die Konkurrenz, was heißt Konkurrenz, sich verdrängen, andere wegzudrängen, dass das gerechtfertigt wird, und dass die Profit, natürlich Konkurrenz und Profit zu machen, diese patriarchale Verhältnisse stärkt und immer wieder reproduziert. Weil, was heißt Konkurrenz? Heißt immer, das wird auch gerechtfertigt, die Schwäche muss und darf auch untergehen. Letztendlich. Ob es jetzt eine Fabrik ist oder eine Person ist. Der Schwäche hat eigentlich letztendlich in Situationen kein Recht zu überleben oder kein Recht zu existieren oder weniger Recht zu existieren, und da muss man davon auch wegschieben. Und dieses Prinzip hat große Auswirkungen, verstärkt natürlich die patriarchale Verhältnisse.
Es gibt schon noch eine Chance, glaube ich, etwas zu sagen, wer ein Bedürfnis hat.
Ich glaube, dass Konkurrenz, das ist der Streit ums Überleben in die Ökonomie, das hat ideologisch sehr große Einflüsse in unsere Erziehung. Der Erste sein, die Beste sein, Sport, all diese Sachen, das ist Konkurrenz. Und dagegen stellte der alte Genosse Kropotkin Kooperation. Und er war ein Ökologe. Er hat in Sibirien Studien gemacht von Pflanzengesellschaften. Und er hat gesehen, dass in schlechte, kalte Umstände die Kooperation zwischen den Organismen sehr, sehr wichtig ist zum Überleben. Und er hat gesagt, Darwins Konkurrenz, das ist nicht alles. Es gibt andere ökologische Mechanismen. Und ich glaube, dass, was du gesagt hast, die Weise, womit wir die Landwirtschaft machen, wo wir gegen Monokulturen sind und für Polykulturen und mit allerlei ökologischen Einwirkungen von Pflanzen und Tieren, dass das ein Vorbild sein muss, wie wir auch die Diversität in unsere Gemeinschaften und in unserer Gesellschaft und die Diversität zwischen Individuen müssen valorisieren und revalorisieren. Und das wird diese patriarchale Unterdrückung, die richtig existiert, wegnehmen, weil die Leute, Männer und Frauen, befreit können sein von diesem Druck. Okay, das war's. Okay.
Naja, okay. Dann haben wir jetzt eine etwas längere Pause. Ja. Was? Nein, nicht so viel, nein. Um 18.15 Uhr geht es laut Programm wieder los mit einer Podiumsdiskussion. Da übernimmt dann wieder die Monika und die 3 Referentinnen werden da sitzen. Okay, das Buffet hat, glaube ich, auch noch was zu bieten.
Ja.
Ja.